Let's look into CSS blend modes. One of the latest capabilities to fall in the hands of web designers is image processing with blend modes, and you can do this natively with CSS. Blending modes allow us to easily create colorization and texturization and apply other special effects without having to crack open any image editing application. Technically, color blending applies mathematical operations to the color components of image pixels. We use blend modes to combine multiple images or images with colors. They are commonly used in design tools such as Photoshop to create a compositional effect. By changing how the colors mix, you can achieve really interesting visual effects. There are two ways that you can use blend modes with CSS. You have the mix blend mode and background blend mode. The mix blend mode applies blending to the entire element, and the background blend mode applies blending to the background of an element. Mix blend mode blends between stacked HTML elements so that the elements on overlapping layers will blend with those beneath it. The mix blend mode affects the entire element, including its pseudo elements. The background blend mode blends between the layers of a background image declaration. This means that as the background images stack on top of each other, you can apply a blending mode to mix them together. You'll use background blend mode when you have multiple backgrounds on an element and you want them all to mix with each other. I'll show you examples of both of these in the upcoming lessons. With CSS blend modes, we have a lot of different options. We have normal, multiply, screen, overlay, darken, lighten, color dodge, color burn, hard light, soft light, difference, and exclusion. And then we have non-separable blend modes. You can think of these blend modes like hue, saturation, and lightness color components. Each takes a specific component value from the active layer and mixes it with the other component values. These are hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. Let's take a look at how we can use blend modes in an actual project. Before we get into using blend modes, I did want to show you the support that blend modes currently have in the various browsers. Most of the modern browsers will fully support blend modes. The exception is IE, which has partial support. So it does not support hue, saturation, color, and the luminosity blend modes, but all of the other ones are supported. So do keep this in mind as you start to use blend modes in your projects. Here's my starting HTML file. I'm linking out to Google Fonts and to my external CSS. And then I have a number of divs located inside of main. Most of the divs simply have classes assigned to them with a text that is going to describe the blend mode that we'll be using. The exception to this is the very first div, in which I have an image sitting inside of the div. The CSS that I'm using is as follows. I have one variable for my text color. I have a few properties on the universal selector that just zero out padding, margin, and set box sizing to border box. I'm setting my body font family to Open Sans, setting the color and the font weight. I have a rule that makes my images responsive. And then on main, I have some padding, some margin. I'm setting a width value, and I'm using grid to set up 2 columns. I have a rule on my main divs, and I have padding on all of them of 1 rem. I'm setting the border on all of them to be a solid 1 pixel neutral color. All of my divs have a standard width and height of 300 by 200. I have margin auto. I'm setting the text color to white. I'm setting a text shadow, font size, font weight, line height, and text align center. On example 1, I'm setting the height to 300 pixels. In addition, I've set the background color to a light teal. This is what the image currently looks like within this particular div. I wanted to show you how we can use blend modes to drop out the background color of this particular image. You may be familiar with blend modes from using tools such as Photoshop to create a compositional effect by mixing colors from 2 or more layers. By controlling and changing how the colors mix, you can achieve really interesting visual effects. You can also use blend modes as a utility, such as isolating an image that has a white background, so it appears to have a transparent background. That's what we're going to do here. We're going to drop out the white background very quickly and easily with just one line of code. In order to achieve this effect, I'm going to go ahead and target the image that is a child of example 1. All I'm going to do here is set the mix blend mode to multiply. If I save and refresh, you will see how the white background disappears within the kelp image. This is a result of using the multiply blend mode. When we use multiply, white pixels will appear transparent. In addition to using the mix blend mode on the image, I'm going to come to example 1, which is the div that contains this image, and let's go ahead and apply a filter. We had looked at filters in an earlier lecture. For this particular example, I'm going to apply a brightness filter of 120%, and then I'm going to apply the hue rotate filter as well. And for the value, I'm simply going to pass in 45 degrees. When I save and refresh, you will see how this just slightly changes how the colors are going to look on top of this div background. Because I applied the filter to example 1, they not only affected the image, but also the background color that we're using here. You can mix blend modes with filters and get exciting and dynamic results. Let's dive into some other examples so that we can continue to use blend modes. For example 2, I'm going to show you how mix blend modes work. I've gone ahead and set the background URL to the whaleshark.jpg. I'm using a background size of cover and a position of relative. I'm also using pseudo classes here of both before and after, and I have some default rules for my pseudo class elements so that they will fill the entire available space of the element that they're pseudo classes to. And then I've set the background color for example 2 after to hot pink and the background color to example 2 before to navy. Because the after pseudo class is the last element within this div, this is why we're currently seeing a pink background. What we're going to do though is we're going to use blend modes so that we can mix all 3 of these elements, the whale shark, the pink, and the blue together. What I'll do to start off with is I'm going to apply a blend mode to the after pseudo class. We're going to be using a mix blend mode, and we're going to set this to multiply. If we save and we refresh, you will see that now we currently do not see the pink at all, but we only see the blue. That's because that's the next element that is being targeted. So what we'll do here is we'll also use a mix blend mode, and we're going to set the value on the blue to lighten. If I save now and I refresh, you're going to see how the pink and the blue are mixing together, and we see the underlying image of the whale shark. In addition to using these blend modes, I'm going to come up to example 2. What we'll do here is we'll use a filter. I'm going to specify grayscale, and then I'm also going to add an additional filter of brightness. We'll pass in a value of 110%. If we save now and we refresh, you're going to see how the blend modes don't show up. And that is because the blend modes of multiply and lighten work with black and white colors. Because I've made this image gray and we don't have any distinct white or black, we no longer see the colors. So do keep in mind that depending on what it is that you're blending together and how you're using them, you might not always see results, and it might be because of the other filters and or blend modes that you're using on various elements. Let's move on and look at the background blend mode so that you can see the difference between these. For example 3, I've already set 3 backgrounds on this particular element. I have the whale shark image, then I have a PNG file called repeat4, and I've set a linear gradient. Now currently we do not see the repeating image or the linear gradient, and that is because the whale shark is showing since it is the first image in my stack. If I want to be able to see all of these together, all I have to do is add a background blend mode, and for this example I'm going to use overlay. If we refresh our page, you're going to see that not only do we see the whale shark, we also see this pattern, that is my repeating for file, and we see some colors, which is the gradient that I've used as an additional background. So without the blend mode, we only see one image, but when we use blend modes, we have access to all of these images, and how they mix together will be affected depending on the type of blend mode that you choose. I'll go into each blend mode specifically so that we can talk about the differences between the blend modes and how they'll affect various elements on the page. We'll start off by using multiply. For example 4, I'm setting the background image to a whale shark, and then I'm just using a linear gradient that goes from blue to gold. I've also set the background size to cover. What I'll do here is I'll set the background blend mode, and this time we're going to use multiply. The multiply blend mode is like stacking multiple transparencies on top of each other. White pixels will appear transparent and black pixels will appear black. Anything in between will multiply its luminosity, which is its light values. This means that the lights get much lighter and the darks get darker. As you can see, because our colors of the gradient are not super light, we are getting a darker version of our original, but you certainly can see the blue to yellow gradient showing through, and then the whale shark is available behind it. If we want to lighten this up a little bit, we can add a filter, and for this I'm just going to add the brightness filter, and we'll pass in 130%. If we save and refresh, you will see that this lightens up the image, and now we can see a little bit more of the whale shark, but we still retain the overlay of the gradient. Let's move on to screen. For the most part, the rest of my examples are all set up in the same way, where I'm using the whale shark background image and a linear gradient. The screen blend mode will multiply the light values. It creates an inverse effect to multiply. It will most often produce brighter results. So if we compare this to our multiply example, you can see how screen is doing a similar type of thing to multiply, but the results are much lighter. The next example that we're going to look at is overlay. The overlay blend mode combines multiply and screen. Base dark colors become darker and base light colors become lighter. Mid-range colors, such as those in the 50% gray, are unaffected. This most often will make your image look richer, and it will intensify the difference between the highlights and the darks. As you can see, if we compare this to multiply and screen, we get a richer and more vibrant version of the blend that we've used in the previous examples. Let's move on to darken next. The darken blend mode compares the source image and the backdrop's image dark color and selects the darkest of the two. It does this by comparing the red, green, and blue values instead of luminosity values. Multiply and screen use the luminosity values, but in this case, darken is using the RGB channels. Darken does this by comparing the RGB values for every color channel. With darken and lighten, new color values are often created from this comparison process. So let's go ahead and add lighten to our next example. Lighten pretty much just does the opposite of darken. So you can see how this is mixing the gradient with our underlying image. The next example that we have to look at is color dodge. If you use color dodge, what's going to happen is it's going to lighten the background color to reflect the source color. Pure black colors often see no effect from this blend mode, but if you have any colors other than pure black, you will get considerable difference in the resulting blend. Color burn is very similar in many ways to multiply, but it increases the contrast, resulting in more saturated midtones and reduced highlights. If we compare this to multiply, you can see how this version of my blend is going to be darker, and I'm going to lose some of the highlights in the image. The next example that we're going to look at is hard light. Using hard light creates a vivid contrast. This blend mode either screens or multiplies luminosity values. If the pixel value is lighter than 50% gray, the image is lightened, as if it were screened. If it's darker, then it's multiplied. And as you can see, when we use the hard light, we still see a little bit of our gradient, but the colors mix in a different way. So where we have the yellow or golden part of the gradient, it's mixing with this teal area and it's actually turning green. In many situations, you will get a more vivid contrast when you use hard light, especially on images that have a lot of color values that are not all black or all white. So anything in the gray area is going to really work well with hard light. Now let's look at soft light. The soft light blend mode is a less harsh version of overlay. It works very much the same way, but with less contrast. If we compare this to our overlay example, you will see how these two images do look similar, but it's just a little bit more muted. It's using less contrast to produce the results. A good way to think about how difference works is it's a bit like a photo negative. The difference blend mode takes the difference value of each pixel, inverting light colors. If the color values are identical, they become black. Differences in the values will always invert. Now let's look at the exclusion blend mode. Using exclusion is very similar to using difference, but instead of returning black for identical pixels, it will return a 50% gray, resulting in a softer output with a lot less contrast. Next, we'll be looking at the non-separable blend modes. You can think of these blend modes like hue, saturation, lightness, color components. Each takes a specific component value from the active layer and mixes it with the other component values. The first one that we're going to look at is going to be hue. The hue blend mode takes the hue of the source color and applies it to the saturation and luminosity of the backdrop color. And as you can see, we will lose details in this particular example where we're going to retain the hue or the colors based on the changes that it detects between the saturation and the luminosity of the backdrop image. The saturation blend mode works a lot like hue, but using saturation as the blend mode will apply the saturation of the source color to the hue and the luminosity of the backdrop color. The color blend mode will create a color from the hue and saturation of the source color and the luminosity of the backdrop color. Lastly, we have luminosity. This is the inverse of color. It creates a color with the luminosity of the source color and the hue saturation of the backdrop color. So you can see that the results look like the gradient has been placed with some alpha on top of a grayscale image. This gives you a good idea of how the various blend modes will affect images. I chose to use the exact same images and the exact same gradients so that you could see the differences. Depending on the images that you're using, whether it's multiple images or gradients with different colors, you will get different results. I would encourage you to experiment around with the blend modes and see which ones work well for you. I tend to most often use luminosity, soft light, hard light, screen, overlay, and multiply. But you could always use some of these other blend modes and get really amazing results. It's awesome that we can use these in a non-destructive way so that we can easily make images look very different, but we can very quickly just remove the CSS and return back to the original image without affecting them in any way. Finally, I just wanted to show you some extra things that we can do using blend modes. We can actually stack blend modes, which means that we can use multiple blend modes on images. For this example, I'm using the whale shark image, but I'm using another image called repeat1.png along with my gradient. What we'll do for this example is we're going to set our background blend mode, and this time I'm going to use multiply, and then I'm going to add another blend mode. This one will be lighten. When you want to add multiple blend modes, you separate them with commas. You want to list the blend modes in the same order as your backgrounds. The final declaration, the bottom layer, is automatically given a normal blending mode. and this can't be changed. If you're using a background color, then that's going to be your bottom layer. So in our case, the whale shark is our bottom layer. The multiply blend mode is going to be applied to the repeat image, and the lighten blend mode is going to be applied to our gradient. If we save and we look down at this example, you will see the results of the repeating PNG, which is an image that looks like this, along with the whale shark, and then we have our linear gradient, which we're applying the lighten blend mode to. As you change and add different blend modes, you'll get completely different results. If I change lighten to overlay, for instance, and we refresh, you're going to see how the images blend in a slightly different manner. The last example that I want to share with you is something that I really like to do using blend modes. This is a great way that you can enhance an image, and this is to use blend modes on the exact same image. So in this last example, I'm actually setting two background images, but they are the same image. What we'll do is we'll set our background blend mode, and if we go ahead and refresh the page, you'll see how the result is going to be darker. Multiply, of course, is going to focus on the darks and hides some of the whites, so this is our resulting blend. If we change this to screen, you will see that now we get a much lighter and vibrant version. This makes the blacks disappear and it makes the whites really show up. Finally, I'm going to use overlay. Since overlay is going to focus on the neutral colors, it basically is going to hide the 50% grays, and it will give us a more vibrant and richer version of our particular image blend. I really like to use this technique when I want to add more contrast to an image or tone it down in a specific way. Hopefully you've learned all about the CSS blend modes and you've gotten some ideas on how you can use blend modes to enhance your web pages and create wonderful non-destructive blends of multiple images within your projects.